Star Wars on Evercade, could it happen? No, possibly. The reason I ask this question is in an interview some months back, it was mentioned by Blaze they were hoping to get licenses like Star Wars and James Bond and things. I think that was more of a throwaway comment to illustrate the size of the licenses they're aiming for. You know, the bigger the licenses, the more people draw in. But the real question is, would Disney be interested in licensing to Blaze? And, well, you never know. I mean, Blaze are a small company, but for retro re-releases, and with recent Tomb Raider and Legacy of Kain, maybe they've got enough of a niche there that it could, make Disney interested. Maybe it's just the cost of the license that's the issue, and maybe Blaze would feel that what it would cost would be worth it, maybe not. Who knows? But if it was to happen, if Disney were to agree, what might Disney or what might Star Wars collections look like? Well, you've got the obvious things such as the Super Star Wars trilogy. Now those were made by LucasArts, so I believe they'll be entirely owned by Disney. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I think that's the case. There shouldn't be any license issues with those, if I'm correct on that. And that probably holds true for a lot of the Star Wars games. Naturally, more recent games will probably have more issues because they'll be tied to the publishers and developers who made them. EA have been doing a Star Wars game for a while. BioWare did some, but none of those are going to run on the Evercade, so they're a moot issue. Then you've got things like the old Star Wars arcade game with the vector graphics, which was developed by Atari. I'm not entirely sure who would, actually own the game itself now, but obviously the rights are still going to be with Disney. So, maybe it can be done, and of course that was an arcade game. Could there be an arcade cart? Well, there was that Star Wars game, and there was a conversion kit for a sequel for the Empire Strikes Back, and then there was the isometric Return of the Jedi game, and there was also the arcade release of Star Wars Racer, or Episode 1 Racer, whatever they called it. So there could potentially be an arcade cart there. Some of these games had home ports. The Star Wars Arcade was ported to various home micros and Atari systems and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm sure if a blue cart would happen, because while there are Star Wars games on them, there's either older systems where there might be better versions such as the arcade one available, possibly. And also then you've got a lot of DOS games, which, we haven't had any DOS games on Evercade, so, I'm largely going to ignore the potential blue cartridge because I think it's a bit less likely. I think, arcade or console is more likely. And I've pretty much covered the arcade with what I've already said, so I think realistically, most likely you would have a red collection. And there are quite a lot of games to choose from. I mentioned the Super Star Wars trilogy, obviously one for each of the first 3 movies, so fairly straightforward. Super Nintendo ports or, versions put on a cart, very easy. Would they be on one cart or would they be spread over a couple? Who knows. What else is there? Well, there's the NES Star Wars, which is also on the Game Boy, Master System and Game Gear. What I found out while doing this video was there's another Star Wars game for the Famicom, which was released in Japan by Namco, so where the rights for on that would be, no idea. Apparently it's based, gameplay-wise, was based upon Alex Kidd. Looks kind of interesting. Is it good? Not a clue. But again, it would be maybe a bit of an obscurity that, would intrigue people. So if it is possible, I think that would be a good addition. There was also an NES Empire Strikes Back game, which I played briefly. Didn't seem brilliant, but, maybe that would be possible. Return of the Jedi, there is a Return of the Jedi arcade, as mentioned, and that was ported to various home systems. But there's also Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle, which is on home systems and the Atari 2600 and 5200. So again, might be possible. When it comes to the later movies, Phantom Menace and onwards, you're kind of getting towards the back end of the PlayStation era. So there are PlayStation 1 games for the Phantom Menace, but the other ones are like PlayStation 2, which wouldn't run. You've obviously got the Phantom Menace game of the movie, which is on PlayStation. And you've got Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which is on the N64 and on Game Boy Color. So again, potentially doable there. And also the recently announced for, a remastering, there's Jedi Power Battles, which is on the PlayStation. But there's also a version on the Game Boy Advance. And there's Battle for Naboo on the N64, which I don't know much about, I never played it. And Obi-Wan's Adventures for the Game Boy Color. And there was a Attack of the Clones game on the Game Boy Advance, so again, maybe that would be doable, as there was also a game called New Droid Army, also on the Game Boy Advance, so again, possible. And there was a Revenge of the Sith game on the Game Boy Advance. So I suppose that is the prequel trilogy covered in some shape or form. I've no idea how good these games are. I might have to try and find them to play and get some footage of them, but, that may be in the video, it may not. The footage in this video, as you can tell, isn't relating specifically to what I'm talking about. It's just Star Wars game footage, is ones that could appear on the collection. Now, see, a popular series of games is like the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter games, which I've never actually played myself, but those were all on DOS and Windows, so I don't think they'd be particularly likely, but if there's a way of doing them, I'm sure they'd be popular, but I've no idea how complex the controls are, whether they would need mouse and keyboard or if they'd be perfectly fine on a controller. And then you've got the Rebel Assault games, which were interesting, and there was one on the Mega CD and 3DO as well as on DOS, and then the sequel Rebel Assault 2 was on the PlayStation, which would seem like the easiest versions for them to do, but obviously it was on DOS as well. After that, it's what is viable. Star Wars Dark Forces, I think would be quite a popular one, that was on PlayStation, as was Masters of Terras Kasai, or whatever it's called, the rather not particularly good fighting game. Again, it would be an entertaining inclusion. And of course there is a whole bunch of other titles, some which I don't know much about, some I do. There's apparently Star Wars Jedi Arena for the Atari 2600. I know nothing of that one. And you've got Shadows of the Empire for the N64. It was a popular game, and I'd assume that would go down quite well for people. And you've got Star Wars Demolition, which is also on the PlayStation. I have no idea if it's any good, but again, it's another potential. And on the Game Boy Advance, you've got two games which I've not heard of: Flight of the Falcon and Apprentice of the Force. So clearly there is a whole bunch of games they could draw upon. Well, a fair few of them are PlayStation 1 games, which might mean gigacarts, but I think it's safe to say Star Wars would be a big enough license to warrant that. Would there be good connections? Oh, they'd definitely be interesting, and there's definitely some good games on them. I mean, the Super Star Wars games are particularly hard, but they are good, and a few of the other games certainly have their merits. Dark Forces would be a solid first-person shooter to have. I'd be interested in playing the fighting game again, but yeah, I do recall it not being particularly good. The thing is, even the games that aren't so good are going to tickle a lot of people's nostalgia glands. These things came out when we were kids, and everyone loves Star Wars one. Most people, because we were kids and pew pew pew, robots and monsters and space wizards, it's all cool. So yeah, it would be a very nostalgia driven collection, and again, there are a fair number of pretty quality games there, or at least well regarded. So the way I see it is, yeah, it could happen. With it, who knows? But then again, what do I know? I've got no insider information. I'm just speculating on, Disney are a business and Disney like money, and if Bays have got enough money, maybe something will happen. Anyway, what do you think? Do you think there would be good collections? Would you be interested in it if it happened? Sound off in the comments below or something. Anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.